Sup, y'all? It's me. It's your boy Asmongold. And today, we're going home.
I mean, come on, you can clearly see that only the most alpha Chad players play Warrior, most manly class in the game. What is up, guys? Scaredy here, and today is the finale of our series that asks the question, which class should you play in Classic TBC? These videos give you a high-level overview about how each of the classes play, what makes them unique, and what to expect from each of their specs. Contrary to most of the meta videos out there that talk about which classes are good and bad, what the meta is, and how to get a spot in raids, I'm just trying to give people an idea if they'd enjoy to play each of these classes. So without further ado, the subject of this video is the Warrior. The most iconic melee DPS, capable of doing heavy DPS and tanking, the Warrior is the perfect class for anyone who loves to get right in the middle of things. So to start off, the thing that separates Warriors from other melee DPSs is they have the option to tank, and they have a resource called Rage that only Feral Druids have as well. Basically how this works is you generate more Rage based on how much damage you deal and how much damage you take, which makes the only barrier to how they play basically how much Rage is a resource you have and not just normal cooldowns like other classes. The key difference too about Warriors compared to some of the other melee classes is Warriors excel at nearly everything when they're in a group environment. Basically they're the most finished class in terms of mobility, sustained damage, they can tank. But if they're playing solo, they're basically not having a good time. Whereas other classes kind of peak by themselves and in small skirmishes, Warriors just get exponentially better based on how many resources they have around them to help. So that is something to take into consideration when you consider playing a Warrior. You are really not like a solo class hero, you are really a group-oriented hero. Warriors have 3 specs: Arms, Fury, and Protection. So the first spec that Warriors have is their Arms spec. And Arms plays like your prototypical barbarian class you'll find in MMOs like such as Diablo, where you use a two-hander to hit heavy damage, and you have a good mix of burst and sustained damage given the rage resource they have. This spec will realistically be mainly your PvP spec as it has the most utility of all of them and the most survival. It also brings Hero Reduce in their Mortal Strike ability, which is one of the most iconic abilities in this spec. You will see this spec time to time in PvE, but historically it's pretty much known as their PvP spec. An Arms Warrior is susceptible in PvP if you leave them alone, but with a healer, they're an absolute wrecking ball and they become unstoppable. Due to the resource Rage, they can outlast any mana user and sustain damage, and they have lesser cooldowns and unlimited resources. Some of the most iconic abilities associated with Arms are Death Wish, which you welcome from the Fury Tree in Classic. It increases your damage and makes you immune to fear for 30 seconds. Mortal Strike, which does damage and reduces healing by 50%. And Second Wind, which is whenever you're stunned or immobilized, you generate rage and HP per second. Basically, you can't be ignored and you just go on an unstoppable tear if they leave you alone. You should consider playing Arms Warrior if you love PvP and the two-hander user playstyle is something that you're really into. I also would recommend this if you're into a more highly mobile melee DPS and you like the consistent damage playstyle as opposed to ganking or just doing burst up front. So moving along to the second spec was the classic god tier spec, Fury Warriors. This is your majority DPS spec where you dual wield, and it works because you have much more attack speed leading to higher rage regeneration. Because of this, you can use your abilities more often, which makes them a more spammy spec than Arms. Fury also has one of the most complex yet smooth rotations in the game, making the spec an absolute blast to play compared to a lot of the other specs that are kind of only a button. Fury Warriors' damage is basically correlated to their gear and rage regeneration, which is why they spiked so hard towards the end of Classic. Basically, the better gear you have, the harder they hit, and the more rage you get. Because of that, it's a circular playstyle that leads you to have unlimited rage. Some of the most iconic abilities for Fury Warriors are Sweeping Strikes, which they take from Arms in Classic, allowing the next 10 hits you do to hit a nearby enemy. Bloodthirst, which deals damage and your next 5 attacks heal you. And then Rampage, which increases your attack power and it stacks with each melee attack you do to keep the buff up. You should consider playing Fury if you like dual wielding, fast-hitting melee DPS that have the rage resource and you get to change stances. It's much more in your face than most of the other melee DPS specs because you constantly have buttons to hit and it's honestly a blast to play. Last but not least for Warriors is their Protection spec, aka their tanking spec. This is the spec that you would play if you have aspirations to tank a lot of dungeons as well as tank raid bosses in the raids you go to. Protection Warriors are still heralded as the king main tanks in TBC, just as in Classic as they have the most damage mitigation of all of the tank specs. They have so many defensive cooldowns compared to the other classes that they almost always tank the main boss of raids. Warriors' most iconic abilities related to prot are Shield Slam, which slams the target with your shield, dealing high threat and removing a damage ability. Devastate, which replaces Sunder Armor in this expansion, dealing bonus damage for how many Sunder stacks you have on them. And Shield Wall, which is your 30-minute major cooldown, reducing all damage you take by 75% for 10 seconds. This is probably the best defensive cooldown in the entire game because it allows you to survive situations that nearly any other class would die. You should consider playing Prot Warrior if you want a tank and you like the rage resource compared to mana. You also like the style of single target tanking compared to AoE tanking. Because of this, you should play Prot Warrior if you really want to be that main tank of your raids and you want to be like the most iconic tank in your group. So yep, that about sums it up for how Warriors play in a very brief overview. The good thing about Warrior and TBC is I don't really see them being as oversaturated in PvE particularly, aside from maybe the tanking environment. In Classic, it got to be a little obnoxious because every raid was bringing about 10 to 15 of them because they were the most optimal class. So you will have a better chance of, getting the spot and or just enjoying like kind of the lesser competition of seeing 20 of you everywhere you go. That being said, I do think they'll be very popular in PvP. They are a very fun class. This is the class I plan on maining in TBC, and I've liked this class since I played the original TBC and Wrath. It feels to me like the most fluid class, and the way Rage works is just, there's no going back once you get into it. So yep, let me know in the comment section if this helped and what you're planning on playing, as I will continue to make more videos related to Classic. Give the video a thumbs up and subscribe, as there will be plenty more to come. Hopefully these videos helped you. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.